Hi, dear friends, some words of Torah for Parshat Beha'alosecha. The fourth book of the Pentateuch is known in Hebrew as Bamidbar, not only because it begins with God speaking with Moshe in the Sinai desert, the word Midbar, but also because more than anything, this book provides us with multiple stories of the lives of the Jewish people while traveling for 40 years in the desert. These years were formative not only for that generation, but for all future generations. The desert events, more than any other period in Jewish history, left indelible markings upon the future history of the Jewish people. Traveling through the desert as an entire nation certainly had its challenges. Many of the commentaries deliberate over how we got the provisions to build a Mishkan while in the desert. Jewish life is hard enough in the big city. How did we manage to do basic things like observe Pesach in the desert? If we had manna, did we still need to eat matzah? What about each family bringing its own Korban Pesach, Paschal offering? Was it even practical for an entire nation to slaughter so many sheep in the desert? When reading about the mitzvah of the Paschal offering, Rashi, citing the Mechilta Midrash, informs us that we were not obligated to bring the Paschal offering until we entered into the land of Israel. We offered the initial Paschal lambs before leaving Egypt, but the mitzvah for future generations did not start until after arriving into Eretz Yisrael. This is based on the very words of the Torah, which, when giving the mitzvah of the Pesach offering in the book of Shemot, states that the mitzvah begins V'haya ki tavo'u el haaretz, when you enter the land. Now, this qualification is seemingly contradicted by the events of our Parsha. A year after we left Egypt, we were still encamped around Mount Sinai in the desert, learning the details of all the mitzvot we had received the summer before. On Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Hashem commands the Jewish people, V'yasu b'nei Yisrael et ha'pasach b'mo'ado. B'nei Yisrael shall perform the rite of the Paschal offering in its allotted time, on the 14th of Nisan. Now, if we were not meant to resume the Paschal offering until entry into Eretz Yisrael, why did Hashem command B'nai Yisrael to offer it while still in the desert? To make things worse, Rashi seems to contradict himself. In his commentary to our Parsha, Rashi comments that the whole episode of B'nai Yisrael being commanded to bring the Paschal offering in the desert is a bit embarrassing for the Jewish people. Despite traveling in the desert for 40 years, this was the only time that the Jews brought a Paschal offering in the desert, which is a shameful thing to have to acknowledge. Even though this event took place earlier in the chronology of events of the book of Bamidbar, it was hidden until here to hide this disparaging fact. But according to the Rashi we cited above from Shemot, there was no obligation to bring the Paschal offering until our arrival into Eretz Yisrael. So what's disparaging about not offering it while still in the desert? The Or HaChaim suggests that originally the plan for Bnei Yisrael was to only need the Paschal offering upon arrival into Eretz Yisrael. But once God saw how rebellious and contentious the Jews were from the get-go, immediately after leaving Egypt, Hashem changed his mind. He decided to reinforce the people's faith by obligating them, while still in the desert, to bring the Paschal offering. The Meshech Chochmah similarly suggests that Hashem specifically required Bnei Yisrael to bring the Korban Pesach as a result of the demoralizing and spiritually harmful sin of the golden calf. Ibn Ezra states that the reason why Bnei Yisrael only offered the Korban this one time in the desert was because while encamped around Mount Sinai, provisions were still easily accessed from surrounding local desert communities. But once the nation ventured further into the desert wilderness, it wasn't practical for them to procure all the livestock and flour they would need to offer sacrifices and bake matzah, and that's why they were exempt for all those subsequent years. In order to accept these explanations, we'd have to reconcile how an omniscient and chronology transcending God can change his mind. But this wouldn't be the first time in the Torah where God is characterized as changing from the original plan. But despite that, we'll attempt another explanation. We note that this commandment of Korban Pesach in the desert precipitated a new commandment, that of Pesach Sheni. This law was introduced in real time when people came forward who were tamei, ritually impure, on the 14th of Nisan. They weren't able to bring their Paschal offering due to their ritual state. Lama nigara, why should we be deprived, was their refrain. We want an opportunity to bring the Korban Pesach also. Is there a make-up opportunity for us? Hashem was so pleased to see the eagerness of the nation to fulfill mitzvot, even when they were exempt for legitimate reasons. He therefore acceded to the request and provided a new law, which allows a Jew who was unable to bring the Korban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan to have a makeup date on the 14th of Iyar 1 month later. Perhaps the very reason why Hashem commanded to bring a paschal offering at a time when we weren't yet expecting to be obligated was precisely to set up this scenario of a group of Jews being taken by surprise with the performance of an unexpected mitzvah and being unable to fulfill the mitzvah for no fault of their own. Hashem sought to evoke this reaction as a way of demonstrating the great commitment of his people, a people who, upon hearing of an opportunity to conjoin with God just a bit more, pleaded for another chance to participate. This narrative is especially important to detail in light of the ensuing stories that appear later in our Parsha, stories which detail the moral failures of the people who complained and rebelled against God. There were multiple reasons for their insurrections, but the bottom line is that it was important to detail the great virtues of the nation before revealing their failings. We thus read about not only their desire to have a makeup for the Korban Pesach, but also their dutiful compliance with following the ark and the clouds of glory as they traveled through the desert. All these are necessary narratives of our goodness before we can get to our failures. Yes, we're a curious people. Stiff-necked and contentious as we are, the first to kvetch and complain when things don't go our way, we nonetheless have this unique virtue within our people to place our faith in Hashem and constantly strive to do better. We are quick to note our failings and to rectify them as a matter of principle. It is that moral conscience within our people that is regularly exploited by the world whenever there's an opportunity to find fault with the Jewish people. Despite our being victims of a horrible slaughter in Israel, the world attacks and criticizes the victims precisely because they know that the Jews have a conscience. Our hope and our prayer is that this bloody war ends as soon as possible, not only for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of the rest of the world as well. May sanity be restored soon, and may the Jewish people continue to shine a beacon of morality and conscience to the rest of the world. May we see this all, dear friends, b'mheira b'yameinu, amen. Here's wishing you a beautiful Shabbos, still praying for all of our hostages. May Hashem continue to watch over them. Shabbat Shalom.